to another edition of Wealthy Being Live. I am T.M.R. Woodford, and this is my co-host, Anim Aweh. Anim,
Hey,
hey, how you doing today, Anim?
I am getting beat down by allergies, but I'm trying to hang in there. How about you?
Whew, haven't felt the beat down, but I like to stay planted up or plant up. Was it planted up? Herbed up. So lots of honey, bee pollen, and things like that are a regular part of my diet around this time of year, especially
Mm,
local bee pollen. Is it is supposed to help with that? Local bee pollen, licorice root will help to clear up the bronchioles, things like that. And check with your physician though, make sure that's not conflicting with anything that you have going on in your body already. If you're hearing this. So yeah, but everybody's having that issue. I don't have that issue, but I have the pollen issue on the car.
yeah, it's all over the place. It's just a mess. Everything is just green outside.
Yeah, and you wash your car today, and it's back green tomorrow. So
No point.
let's see how green it can get.
Yeah.
So today we have a pretty interesting topic as usually, and we base our topics, of course, on what people want to talk about the most. Today it's quiet burnout and not the obvious kind. Ooh.
Yeah. This is a very relevant one, I feel like.
It is. We've all felt that way. Many of us still feel this way. You don't have to feel this way every day, but you're going to feel it some days.
Yeah. No, I think my sister's going through it right now, and she's like made the difficult decision to kind of remove herself from the situation, causing the most stress, right? Because when we think of, I don't even know why we call it silent burnout. Or like, I don't know when that changed from just general burnout, but like one of the things that we know is like this state of chronic stress, right? And so I one of the things I always say to people, for even myself when I was in that space, is like something has to change in order for you to sort of get out of that space of burnout. It's going to take a lot more than a vacation, a 1 week vacation. A nap's not going to do it. A bath is not going to do it. There are going to have to be some like really fundamental changes that are going to have to shift drastically in your life. But we'll definitely be talking about that.
Yeah, well, you're right. Things have to change. And it also exposes how prepared are we to manage the stress in our lives,
Mm,
and how realistic are we about the capacity and level of stress that we're able to take on?
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of us aren't actually equipped to handle certain stress, right? Like, I think stress is a normal part of life. It happens. How we handle it makes a difference, right? But not all of us have the capacity to manage it. Not all of us have the capacity or the coping skills, rather, or not all of us have a like fully loaded toolbox, as we call it in the field, to kind of help manage stress. So then it can be all consuming in a lot of ways. And so it can hit some people a lot harder than other people. And I think it really is going to be important for us to understand like what does our capacity to manage stress look like. Also, do I have to tolerate stress for such a prolonged time? Am I allowed to walk away from certain situations, right? As I mentioned, I've walked away from a job, and one of the things I'm a huge advocate of is like FMLA, right? Family Medical Leave Act. And I sign them for my clients. I've taken it for myself. And one of the things that I always say, like, that's a temporary solution because it doesn't resolve whatever is going on. It gives you relief from it for like a little bit, maybe a couple of weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, even better. But ultimately, you go back to the stress, and then what happens, right? If you haven't learned any coping skills, rather, if you haven't learned anything sort of about yourself, you're just going back into the same situation to deal with the same crap.
There you go. And the coping skills, learning how to identify what your stresses are, learning how to identify what the emotional state is that you're in that leads into the stress, right?
Yeah.
Something happens, and then you're feeling a certain way. And are you managing the emotional state, right?
Yeah.
Because it's usually not the issue or the problem. How are we allowing that circumstance to impact our mental and emotional state? Um, And interestingly enough, 55% of US workers report being burned out. 55%.
It's more than half.
Up to 82% of employees are at risk of burnout, right? Globally, over 43% actively feel burned out right now. Wow.
It's a lot of people that are like tapped out.
Whoo! Well, and let's be clear, the reason why many of us, and I have to put me in there because I felt it, I feel it. There are days when I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna lay in this bed. This is how I'm
Mhm.
today. The
Yeah,
bed is where I'm coping. I'm logging out of everything. And
yeah,
not speaking about, I'm talking about of talking to people, but then I admit that I will get to a point of taking myself out of situations because I've pushed myself too far. I didn't
mm,
give myself time to decompress on the weekend, or maybe I'm not taking enough quiet time, or maybe I'm not meditating, or the one I'm really guilty of, maybe
yeah,
I'm not going to sleep at a good enough hour or an efficient hour for me, and I'm trying to get more done, and then
yeah.
I'm popping up. I'm going to sleep at 12 and popping up at 4 a.m. saying, "Yeah, I'm going to the gym." So what
That's
is what is healthy when it comes to that? How do we determine that? That's the
yeah. I think healthy looks differently for a lot of people, right? Because as I'm hearing what you recognize for yourself when you're not engaging in particular practices, how it impacts you, the reality is that that might not suit everybody every time, right? And the first thing my mind goes to is like a single mom or a single dad, right? They probably don't have time to meditate or go to the gym at 4 a.m. because it's just not practical for their lifestyle. And I think one of the most important things to kind of highlight, if you will, is that there needs to be space for multiple truths, or that this idea of healthy, we need to broaden that context so that people can see themselves in it, but also they can do what makes sense for their life, right? Because I think too many times on this health journey, right, wherever you are, is that we see people doing it one way and we think we have to do it that way. And if we don't do it that way, or if we fail at doing it that way, then we're automatically a failure. And that's not necessarily true. What does need to happen is that you need to take into account what's going on in your life right now, what your maybe your financial circumstances are, maybe your like job circumstances are, and all those, and make it work for you, right? And so like I appreciate you saying like the mindfulness part, because that's really important. That can look different ways. That can look like going out for a walk, that can look like going to the gym, that can look like journaling, that can look like a lot of things. And so there's room for sort of multiple truths, if you will, and if we allow ourselves to accept that, right? It doesn't need to look it's not one linear path. And I think sometimes in this day and age of social media where, the influencer does this and then we feel like we got to run and do that too. Nah, yeah, we got to do different things and it's okay.
You're right. And the thing is, we do tend to look at other people and compare ourselves and say, well, if they're doing this, maybe it'll work for me. But to your point, for me, I can actually go to sleep at 12 and wake up at 4 and still go to the gym and function for a certain amount of time. Like I
Yeah.
might be able to hit it for 2, 3, 4 days, but then I might crash at 7, 8 p.m. one night and not wake up until 8 a.m. the next morning. You understand? So it's knowing what your, uh, I hate to use the word limit, so I'm going to say what your standards are, right?
Mhm.
What your best practices are for taking care of yourself. And part of it has to be also considering that you may be overdoing it sometimes and just giving time for yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Have you had a time where like you realize like maybe I am actually overdoing this?
Yeah. Yeah. I do. And then the reality kicks in that I won't be able to do anything if I don't take care of my body, right? If I don't get rest and then I wake up and I'm trying to do a bunch of things, I'm going to burn out midday.
Yeah,
I'm going to have the capacity to show up as much as I normally would.
absolutely.
My thoughts may be fragmented. and I might not be 100% present in the meeting because matcha isn't working today. you
Yeah.
know, I might start fantasizing about those old coffee days, like, coffee might have pushed me,
So
but
you
that's
don't drink coffee at all?
no, I don't drink coffee anymore. I used to drink coffee, but then I stopped. And there are varying reports and conflicting information about its benefits. But I think that the truth is, too much of anything is not good for you.
That's true.
So finding a healthy balance between maybe matcha and coffee, or just getting some rest.
Yeah.
Let's be real. We can't substitute self care for
A
a
drink.
cup of coffee, some coconut milk. It's
A
just,
Celsius, like everybody's drinking.
and it doesn't work that way. The same thing is, I had to admit with myself at a point, if I want to work out really hard early in the day, that wasn't indicative of me being able to high perform throughout my workday, because I would get tired.
Yeah.
So to maybe then work out after work, if I wanted to go heavy and hard into it, because I didn't realize that. I said, man, what am I doing so tired? Like, dude, you did 45 minutes of weights and 45 minutes of cardio. You need a nap.
Yeah. At 4 a.m., you definitely need to go to sleep.
You need a nap. So, figuring that out is obviously vital for us. But this is another statistic that's interesting.
Hmm.
Okay. Younger, high functioning people are the most affected in this. It's
Wow.
not the older people that, can say, well, I need to take some time, or, Papa is going to fall asleep on the couch anyway. he's going to clock out. But Gen Z burnout rates exceed 50%, and in some studies, 80% of younger workers report burnout.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, especially with this sort of, whether it's high functioning anxiety, high functioning stress, high functioning depression, with these things, have we learned over time, many of us millennials, to sort of perform, right? We learn to perform. We learn to do just enough to get the job done or get the role or graduate through school. And through that performance, a lot of us are suppressing what we feel because we have to meet whatever that goal is, right? Whether that pressure is coming from families, whether that pressure is coming from ourselves because we're high achievers, because of our childhood, like we talked about last week. Everything, a lot of things connect back to childhood and those early relationships. But this idea that we have to perform and we have to continuously going, and we do a really good job masking it, but it's almost to the point where it's to our detriment in a sense, right? It's almost to the point where, like, you know this one day we may just not have it, right? And what happens right at that time? Do I take it as I'm a complete failure? And like, I think our body can only operate at that intense level for only so long, right? Granted, we're all different, it looks differently for everybody, but it's a lot of stress to put on our bodies, and that's something that we have to be mindful of. And that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you have to slack off, oh, you're lazy. It doesn't mean any of those things, but like, again, there's this spectrum. How can we make room for sort of multiple truths through that spectrum? Or even, I think something you mentioned earlier is like, can I check in with myself today, see if I actually have the capacity? Some days I do and some days I don't, and it's okay, right? Like, I always, my sister, something my sister always says is like, she works in tech, one of these big fintech companies. She's just like, yo, I'm not doing open heart surgery. Like, nobody's gonna die if like something doesn't get done, at this moment. I think sometimes, if you're not a doctor or a nurse, like sometimes you got to remind yourself that, and embrace that sort of privilege, if you will, to not be in those spaces where you have to sort of be functioning all the time, or like saving lives per se. Not, a lot of us aren't doing that. Even in my work, I'm not necessarily doing that.
That's true. And admittedly, I am also in a space where I'm not necessarily handling emergencies. However, part of it is, and we'll use social media as an example, there is this personal race that we put ourselves in. It's not even the rat race that it used to be, where we're now competing with yesterday's self to try to get further ahead within these goals. But
Yeah,
we're missing the mark on realizing, if I don't take care of this body
yeah,
and this mind, I
yeah.
won't not and cannot, I cannot be a high performer
Yeah.
if I am not taken care of. I
Yeah.
cannot be a high performer if I'm not taking care of my mental health and if I'm bogged down. Our capacity is not unlimited. We do get to a point of overload. And
Absolutely.
when we're overloaded, what happens?
Yeah. You're
Shut down.
gonna fall flat is or something, or you're gonna explode on someone. It's sort of
Yes,
the other.
the shutdown, and in some cases, like you said, there's an explosion. But in most cases, we literally just wear ourselves down so that the parts of our lives that we have to show up for, other than work, we're not showing up.
We
Right?
don't.
We're unable to. We don't have the capacity. And I'll give you an example. If I remember having to talk on the phone so much at one point in time, and what I did
Yeah.
after I was done, I would not call anyone.
All social relationships plummet.
Like, because you don't have but so many people that you can talk to in a day before you feel spent,
Mhm.
right? It's almost like the cook that cooks all day at work, but he comes home and he never cooks, right? It's
Mhm.
like, I don't feel like cooking for myself. I
Yeah.
do this all day for these people. It's only but so much I can take. And now I have to wonder also, are there certain people that are doing the most so that they can prove their value? Is there a group of people? Let's say I was just speaking to someone. I'm not going to shout them out, because they might be looking. Their employer might be looking, but um, they were just talking about recently how and based on these new statistics, 78% of workers say they're given extra responsibilities at work, with 53% of them saying they are not compensated for it.
That's
But in some cases, in order to keep a job, how many people feel like they have to do more than what is required in order to keep that job?
a lot of people probably, especially with this current market.
And I get that, and I can see where that could be true. And don't get me wrong, one thing about a high performer, if you want to do things at a high level, you have to be consistent. How you do one thing is how you're going to tend to do many things, which is why I always look at that person that sweeps garbage into the corner and leaves it there like,
Yeah.
hey, you better get that garbage up, but at the same time, burnout costs businesses $322 billion
It's a
annually.
lot of money.
So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Employers, if you're allowing your workers to do more than they're supposed to, they're actually not doing the best job that they can, which is costing you money.
Right. Absolutely.
Check in with your employees. Hey, are you feeling good? Hey, you need a day?
Absolutely.
You need another day of vacation? I'll give up one of mine. You want me to show up? You want to leave early? I'm going to come and work for you.
Absolutely.
You all you're doing is sending emails and on select calls, but they're doing what they have to do to drive sales and to get those numbers in. Maybe you need to give them an extra vacation. Maybe there's something through a partnership you have where you can send them to a spa day.
Yeah.
Do something nice for them.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's costing you money. And it may not seem like it is, but the days of burning people out to make money are far behind us.
Oh yeah. And I mean, like you said, you ultimately end up losing solid talent, which is negatively impacts like a company, right? Like it sort of makes it unsustainable to keep good quality talent because nobody wants to work in an environment where like number one, you're taking on a lot more work than has been defined by your role when you can't, onboarded with the organization. And then number two, what does that say about the morale of the company, right? What does that say about company culture, right? If there are no boundaries, if there is no structure, like nobody really wants to, you would have to be paying a pretty penny. And even still, there are people that are waking up and realizing sort of the golden handcuffs and saying to themselves, like, you know what, like the money might be good, but my sanity is worth more. So a lot of people are walking away. And even in this current job climate, climate where like it doesn't look like it did in 2020, where everybody was getting hired really fast, really quick, joining these amazing companies. People are will walk away in this climate and with their head held high and knowing that their mental health and their well-being is worth way more than anything else. And sometimes that's the hard decision, or part of the hard decision that has to be made for a lot of people when you are trying to overcome burnout per se.
And we have to change that as a culture because some of my favorite, and speaking of the pandemic, some of my favorite restaurants closed down during the pandemic because they didn't have workers.
Mm,
A lot of great businesses, their quality of service has gone down because they are allowing their workers to burn out, you know,
it's tough.
and that's insane. With that, the numbers are saying engagement is dropping. Even if the performance looks fine, global employee engagement dropped from 23 to 21%. And that 2% drop is massive at scale because of less motivation, less emotional investment, and more just getting through the day. Meaning they're just going to do whatever they got to do to get through your little job, and then they're going to go on to what they really want to do.
Literally, right?
Now,
And
you have a revolving door, and you're paying more for training and retention instead of taking care of the people that you have.
right, right. No, and it begs the question, are we taking, or not are we, but like our corporations and companies, are they taking a sort of reactive approach or a sort of proactive approach, in that perhaps you are training managers and leaders or people who are working directly with the people leaders on how to sort of identify these signs, how to intervene, how to sort of have conversations to possibly poach this. And a lot of managers, is what I'm finding, is that they don't feel equipped to like address that Pandora's box or even try to open it, because like mental health is like a scary thing, and some people just genuinely don't know what to do with it, and that's fine. But like, are you investing in the quality trainings to support them in, not that you need to train them to be therapists or coaches or anything like that, but train them to sort of how to properly engage, how to support somebody that might identify that they are struggling? Are there the proper channels that you have established to kind of walk them through if you do identify they're struggling? Those things are really important for people managers and managers in general that are sort of directly speaking or working with those people, and even for themselves as well, right? Because they might see themselves through those trainings and like they don't know where to go next, they don't know what to do, they're burnt out, they're tapped out as well, and they're struggling as well. So it's like we really have to take a sort of a holistic approach, if you will, like starting from like the top down, really, and kind of addressing a lot of these systemic issues that are happening or starting with the workplace, right? Because what do people spend, like 40% of their lives at work?
Yeah,
A lot of time.
that's a lot.
That's a
Well,
lot.
that's right. It is a long time. And then we have to ask the question, what does proper management of this burnout and this quiet burnout look like?
Yeah.
And it starts with us understanding it, and what does it look like? It looks like showing up but feeling nothing,
Yeah.
you know,
Apathetic.
doing
Feeling.
the
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like dread, like that sense of dread going into the workplace. I think that's something that becomes more persistent and more intense over time. Feeling detached from sort of reality, if you will, detached from the work, and like one of the things I genuinely see is like people who are passionate about their work, or at least when they come in, they're super passionate, like they really enjoy doing this thing, they've been specializing in this thing, and suddenly that feeling is like far removed because of this culture again, or this environment that's just sort of stripped them of that. Way too much on their plate. They're not meeting deadlines, they're not meeting goals, they might, be overlooking little small things. um I mean, there are probably so much more that I'm missing in that.
Yeah, and you got it though. You hit it on the head. They're basically doing the work, but it's losing the meaning. They're functioning without energy. They're not into it anymore. And they're just going through the motions. And no one in any company's C suite or executive team should want a group of people that are not engaged with what they're doing, because that's going to extend and transcend to the overall quality of what you're offering as a business. Take care of your people, because your people ultimately take care of the people that
Right.
keep you in business.
Right.
right? So making sure we manage burnout and mental health for workers and employees has to be a top priority. And I know there are some companies that are focusing on that right now, aren't there?
There are some, but I don't think there's enough to sort of meet the demand, especially if with those numbers that you portrayed for us earlier. There's
Yeah,
definitely not enough people like answering the call and responding to like potentially, right, this public health crisis that's like I think it's fair to label it as such that we're venturing into. And so there's a lot more to do and companies really um have to put the money behind all of this to kind of support trainings and various initiatives to kind of support the mental well-being of people within their organizations because this is where it's starting for a lot of people.
that part. Well, with more than half the people we know being burned out and they're just hiding it, we also have to have some sort of intervention and maybe even have group meetings, community meetings. There should be a burnout group really at every job. Like literally, hey, are you burnt out? Do you need to talk about it? Do you need more support? Are you not getting enough support in your position at your job? Why are you burned out? Are you not being paid enough? When was the last time they received a raise?
Yeah,
Cost of living is going up.
every day.
Bills are going up every day, but people's pay isn't going up. A lot of companies' bottom lines are going up, but are you incentivizing your people?
Yeah,
Because what's going to happen is this: no one needs your job enough to want to go and be miserable at your job.
no. I don't think companies are really understanding that yet.
Well, a lot of times have changed, and if we want to talk about the most burned out, which are Gen Zers, they don't care about money as much as past generations did.
They don't. They
They
don't. They're an interesting group.
They value their time. They value experiences, and things that are going to keep them in alignment. So if you are not an employer that's invested into health programs and keeping your people from being burnt out, that's why you have people like Anim with trauma informed care. This is a type of trauma.
Yeah,
Don't
absolutely.
This is a type of trauma, you
Absolutely.
know? And that's why you have people like Anim that's focused on trauma informed care. And that's why you have Quincentia, the company that I work with, and we're focused on helping to identify behavioral patterns that are detrimental and
Yeah.
reframing them and upgrading those behaviors into those that are helpful. So you have to get the right professionals to come in, and you have to spend on these programs because these programs are ultimately going to keep people wanting to work for you.
Yeah.
Oh, they care. They care enough to at least find the right people. They don't have to come here and give me a motivational speech. And this is what your employees are thinking. But if you care enough to allocate funds for a program that your people can relate to and maybe have peer groups,
Yeah.
employee groups that are confidential where they can sit and talk and vent, and get out some of their frustrations and get the support they need to help them in the job.
Yeah.
Because all these people overperforming but getting underpaid.
Yeah. There's no point.
If you're overperforming, your job is benefiting from it in most cases.
Yeah.
But I've seen that women oftentimes think because they have to compete with men that they have to do more in a job. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, women make 60 cents to a man's dollar. So, like, I think a lot of us, unfortunately, do have to come into this space and try, especially if you're a Black woman coming into the workplace, the sort of playing field isn't leveled. And so there is a lot that we come into these workspaces with and have to deal with, right? I think the perfect example was that professor, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, she was at an HBCU and unfortunately committed suicide due to ongoing stress at work, right? And her superior happened to be a white man and she made multiple reports. And for y'all, forgive me, I can't remember her name, but like, she had taken multiple steps. She had reached out to HR. She had did all these things, and unfortunately, she cut her life short as a result of the insurmountable stress that she was under. And I think it's fair to say it's way past burnout at that point, right? Like I get this. Actually, let me share my screen because I can do you one better. I like to give folks this diagram, if you will, from a training that I do about burnout. And it's this idea that um, like you think of a traffic light sign, right? Where the different areas where we know where to stop, yield, or keep going. And then, so it's sort of the same sort of concept in terms of signs of burnout, right? So, like if you have this green area, you're productive, you're creative, you're solution focused, you're effective, you're an effective communicator, you feel supported and valued, which is really important. Some of the things that we were talking about today. And then you have this yellow area where, like, low productivity, easily frustrated, overwhelmed, loss of motivation. Like we're slowing down. Things aren't doing too well, but we're slowing down, but we're continuing to move forward, right? That might be that high functioning person operating in this level. And then you have this red area where, like, you're beyond fatigued, you have headaches every day, you're depressed, perhaps addiction too. I think something that we don't often talk about with burnout is addiction.
Yeah.
For some people, that it goes hand in hand. High levels of stress, high levels of depression, high levels of anxiety, they're turning to bottles, they're turning to whatever the addiction is. Frequently ill, because we know that when we're under a huge amount of stress, that compromises our immune system, so we're more susceptible to becoming sick, and ongoing irritability. So this person is just like flat out, just can't do this anymore, can't take it, and they're just over the whole situation. But I like to just share that with folks because that's just the reality for many people in the workplace. And similar to the story that I mentioned earlier about that professor at that HBCU who unfortunately her life was cut short, she was past that red point, right? And I say past that red point is usually a like really severe case of major depressive disorder, I'd argue. But that's why it's so important to be able to identify these things, not even just for ourselves, but like on a company level. If you're doing this type of work, human work, people work, you need to be at least informed.
That part, you have to be informed, you have to stay informed, and you have to understand that this is the new abnormal. I don't want to call it normal, but it is normal because when 50 to 80% of people report burnout, this is the new normal now. And, it's only the normal because it's hard to spot, mainly because high functioning people are the ones. And it's hard to spot it because you think they're doing good and this is who they are and they're just going to go hard no matter what. Just because you have standards doesn't mean you don't get burned out,
Right.
because burnout doesn't always reduce performance immediately. It
Mhm.
reduces emotional connection first, right?
Yeah, that's attachment.
Productivity can stay high until it suddenly crashes. And that's when, oh, what's going on with the numbers? No, what's going on with you? Not
So,
realizing this person was going through it or having checks and balances in place because this is a real thing and
yeah.
it has to be dealt with. You know, it has to be dealt with.
Absolutely. And then again, it speaks to this idea like, are we proactive or reactive? Or are we only jumping in when people get it wrong or when they have that crash out and they let everything go, right? Like, it's a little too late at that point. And so, whether we're coaching, whether we're providing emotional support, it should be a collection of all sorts, right? The budget should be able to pay for or afford those type of things to really support the whole person, right? And companies, you got to remember that it's going to take a lot, especially with these Gen Z population who is just like pushing back. They're not dealing with everything that maybe we would have, or like our generation before us. They are stepping back and saying, "Hey, like if this situation doesn't work for me, I'm not dealing with it." Right? So like you have a whole workforce that's coming and one behind them that if we don't learn to engage them properly, your company will literally tank.
That part. So then we have to think, so what are the solutions, right? Awareness is going to always be the first thing, and you can't fix what you normalize. This has been normalized.
Yeah.
So you cannot fix something if it has been normalized because most people don't realize they burned out because they're still functioning.
Mhm.
They compare themselves to the worst case or they've adapted and they feel drained. So we then begin to ask ourselves, do I feel engaged or just obligated? I'm sure most of us have asked that question. Am I energized after work or just relieved it's over? These are some of the warning signs. If everything feels like maintenance instead of meaning, that's burnout, right?
Yeah.
So, first, we have to reduce our load that we take on at work before adding self care. We can't bandage it with meditation and all of these other things like the gym and journaling,
Yeah.
but
Vacation even. It's still not gonna fix it.
because we're not removing the overload,
Yeah.
drop one unnecessary responsibility, renegotiate deadlines or expectations, or just say not right now instead of yes. It doesn't have to be right now. We have to rebuild dopamine the right way.
Yeah.
Burnout equals low emotional reward loop, right? Your brain stops feeling excitement, satisfaction, and progress, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's exactly what it is. And so, in addition to what you were saying, I think there also has to be sort of I'm not to say that I'm the person that coined this term, but there has to be this idea around really progressiveness in the workplace, but also really understanding for ourselves that there are sort of three tiers, if you will, that we have to address to kind of get past this, right? So, like from a physical standpoint, there are physical decisions that we might have to make. And so, some of those physical decisions might be taking time off from work, calling in, things like that. Like, we got to do that to address some of that. Also, I think there is the opportunity to do some mental restructuring, right? Like you mentioned, kind of reprioritizing, shifting some of what that looks like, reset expectations, leaning on your community. Leaning on your community can mean different things for different people. And also, I think there's a cognitive sort of aspect that I think that element includes therapy for those people who are probably in that red zone to really kind of address some of that stuff that's going on, particularly with my high functioning people. I'd argue that there's an element of like perfectionism, of there's some story there. And I think there's an opportunity to unpack that story. But sometimes we can't do that when we're stuck within the workplace working 60 hours a week. It's just not possible or practical. So I think there's that. And also, the research kind of looks at different levels of intervention, right? Like on a national level, obviously we need national healthcare. So that can fund therapists and clinicians doing the work. There's organizational workplace culture level where like you having sort of the transparent groups, conversations, fireside chats, things like that to kind of support the employee wellness initiatives, if you will. Then you have sort of the unit, if you will, the team environment where you delegate an individual to support with team building gatherings, like just really embedding the well-being sense within the community. And then finally, sort of on the individual level, like how you do things like self-care, or how you like what are you putting in that toolbox to take care of yourself when stress gets really high, like having those things accessible to you and working on that for yourself as an individual. So that was a lot, but there's so many ways. But like I think the most important thing is that companies have to be willing to put the money and the dollars behind these initiatives to support the workforce.
Absolutely. All of those things are intentional aspects of what an employer can do to make sure they're good. And I don't know of many that do, but I know that, and I've learned, Steve at Indigo Road, which is a hospitality group based out of Charleston, South Carolina, spoke of how mental health is a priority for his employees, making sure that they all have access to mental health, making sure that they give assistance with things like down payments on their home, making sure that they stay tapped in with them, right? So employers have to make an effort by creating programs or getting the right people like us to come in and create the programs. And then employees, people, it's your job too. So, and it's not fixed by a weekend off, it's fixed by daily nervous system resets. 10 minutes of no input, no phone, no music, no talking. Maybe 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how much time you can allot to that. It could be right before you go to bed. It could be first thing you wake up in the morning, but that's one way. Short walks without distraction. No listening to music, no talking on your phone, just walking, breathing, sun on your face, enjoying the environment around you.
Mhm.
The other thing we can do is breathing slower than normal, right? Because this is more important than people actually know. This helps to reset the autonomic nervous system, right?
Yeah.
And it's those nervous system resets that we definitely need. And then from there, we can work on reconnecting to the meaning, okay?
Sure.
Because ultimately, quiet burnout equals a disconnection from our purpose, right? So we have to ask, why does this work matter to me?
Yeah.
If it doesn't, why am I still doing it? Then we have to adjust our thinking. We have to change how we do the work, change what we're focusing on while doing the work, or start planning an exit. Like you said, sometimes you
Absolutely.
just gotta stop
You just gotta go.
and walk out, but set hard boundaries when it comes to technology, because part of this is we're not paying enough attention to ourselves and what matters. So
Yeah.
what's gathering your attention and taking your attention from taking care of yourself? No, and this is something that I do every day. No phone for the first 1 to 2 hours of the day. When I start with 30 minutes, start with 10, 15 minutes incremental, but don't let the phone be the first thing you do. Maybe
Yeah.
no scrolling during meals, or when you're having a conversation with someone, hone in and focus on that.
Yeah.
These are little things that we can do and we need to do. And especially, and this is one part I know that most of us miss, and I miss it oftentimes too, because I can get caught up in my world, reintroduce human connection.
Yeah.
Okay? One real conversation a day, not texting. One real call someone, have a real conversation. And most of the time, we think we don't have time for these things. But if we can sit and scroll on our phone, we can put our phone down, put our piece in, or just put the phone on speaker and just talk to people and
Yeah.
talk about something real, not just logistics.
Yeah.
How you're feeling, how your family's feeling, things and matters of the heart, things that will actually make you feel good and connected to yourself.
Yeah.
Regulate emotions through connection, not content.
I love that. I think it really is about doing those things, like you said, that help us get reconnected to ourselves, and like those things that make us feel good about ourselves. Those things that help us remember, like, what is this all about? Because it's just so easy to sort of lose sight of that, especially when you are in that really dark place. So getting back to those things and being intentional. It's all about intentionality. None of this shifts or change without a level of intention and awareness. So whether on a corporate level or an individual level, there needs to be a level of intention in order to sort of move forward and get to a place of like on the journey of recovery or on the journey of like healing, and whatever that looks like for you. But we gotta be intentional about taking those next steps.
Yeah, and I always say, if
Sorry.
even if you didn't intend to, what you pay attention to, it becomes your intention. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't intend to, but what were you paying attention to?
Yeah.
Attention and intention. Attention directs intention. So whether you intend to or not, you paid attention to it. You attended it. You
Yeah.
know, you attended it, which you are the one that made that happen. And these are the things we have to think of, because ultimately it's in our control. Us,
Absolutely. I believe that.
it's not just the employers, even though we just got on employers bad, but it's not just them.
Yeah,
It's
no.
but when you start focusing on that job, you will lose sight of yourself. And
Sure.
that's part of people's role, is to focus on what they're doing. So employers help people to focus back on themselves so they can take responsibility again, so you will stop losing money and so that you won't have to pay as much in these programs.
Yeah. If you're a billion-dollar company, even like multi-million company, you have no excuse to not invest in the well-being and the support of your employees. Like they are the reason why you're doing that well. Give back to the people that are helping you. I think there's just no excuse for it.
You're right about that. And the well-being of our employees, the well-being of ourselves is crucial to the growth of our society. We don't need more people burnt out and snapping and going home and losing it and losing their jobs. These are things that are all preventable, right? So we have to stay in tuned and stay tuned in. Like you need to stay tuned into our next episode,
Yes.
which will be next week, and it's going to be good. I don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be good. It's going
If
to
you have
flow.
ideas, let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have any ideas in what we should talk about, let us know. But Anim, as usual, it's a pleasure.
Always.
I thank you for being here. This was a heavy topic. This is another one we can do a part two, and I guess we can do a part two on all of them, right?
Absolutely.
But for more like this, make sure you follow Anim. What's your handle, Anim?
At Anim Aweh on pretty much every platform.
And that's ANIMAWEH.
That's correct.
And you can follow me at I am T.M.R.W. everywhere online. I think on Twitter or it's X now, it's just T.M.R.W. Until next time, this is Wealthy Being.